It is 2 o'clock in the morning, and you flip on the kitchen light, and 30 roaches scatter into the walls before your eyes have even finished adjusting. You have tried the sprays. You have tried the little plastic traps from the hardware store. You have paid an exterminator who came in a white truck, walked your baseboards with a canister on his back, and promised you it was handled. 11 days later, they were back. Sound familiar? There is a white powder sitting on a shelf at your grocery store right now, in the laundry aisle, not even hidden, that costs about $4 a box, and it does not just push roaches out of one room into another the way a spray does. It ends the colony. Ants, spiders, mice, bedbugs, silverfish, fleas, earwigs, termites, weevils in your flour, ticks in your yard, wasps in your eaves. One plain powder, more than 24 different pests, and grandmothers on farms like mine have been using it since before the exterminator's truck was even invented. Let me tell you plainly what it will not do before I tell you what it will, because I would rather you trust me than be impressed by me. It will not leave a chemical smell in your house. It will not require you to leave the home for hours while it airs out. It will not stain your countertops or your floors. It will not need a man in a suit to come apply it for you. It will not wear off in 11 days the way that spray did, and it will not cost you a service contract, ever, as long as you use it right and keep it dry. I am going to show you every single place we use it on this farm, in the order that matters, and I am going to be honest with you about the one thing that makes people give up on it too early, and the one real safety word you need to hear about keeping it away from small children and pets. Stay with me to the end, because the last hack I am going to show you is the one my own grandmother kept doing every single week for 30 years without anyone in the family ever noticing, and it is the reason our house has never had an infestation take hold. My name is Isaac Hostler. I am Amish. I farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, with my wife Miriam and our 4 children. We keep hogs and we keep laying hens, and between the barn and the henhouse and 4 children tracking in from the fields all summer, if there were ever a household that should be overrun with pests, it would be ours. It is not. It has not been in my whole life, and it was not in my father's whole life before me, and the reason sits in a box under nearly every sink and behind nearly every barn door in my community, plain as anything, and hardly anyone outside of it has been told to look for it. Before we go any further, here is what this powder actually is, because once you understand it, every single thing I show you today will make sense on its own. It is called borax. It is not a chemical cooked up in a laboratory. It is a mineral salt, dug straight out of dry lake beds the same way you would dig clay or gypsum, made up of boron, sodium, water, and oxygen. Nothing more mysterious than that. When a crawling pest walks through it or eats it, 2 things happen at once. It scrapes and dries out the waxy coating on the outside of the creature, the layer that holds its moisture in, and it disrupts the digestive system on the inside if any of it is ingested. And here is the part that makes it so much more powerful than a spray. It is slow. It does not drop a roach in its tracks the moment it touches the powder. That pest walks away, grooms itself, eats, and carries trace amounts of that powder back to wherever the rest of the colony is hiding. By the time symptoms set in, days later, that one pest had already made several trips home. A spray kills the pest standing in front of you. Borax reaches the ones you never see. Now, I know some of you are thinking, if it is slow, why not just use something faster? I want to answer that honestly because it is the single biggest misunderstanding folks have about this powder, and it is the reason most people who try it for the first time give up before it ever gets the chance to work. Fast is not the same as thorough. A fast spray kills the pests standing in the open. It does nothing for the nest behind your wall, or the colony under your porch, or the eggs tucked into a crack you will never find. Borax does not care whether you can see the nest. It rides home in the grooming and the feeding and the trophallaxis, the sharing of food mouth to mouth that worker insects do for the young and the queen, and it takes the whole colony down from the inside without you ever having to find where they were hiding. My grandfather used to say, "It does not kill the ant you see. It kills the ants you will never see." And that is the ant problem actually solved instead of just postponed. And here is the mistake almost everyone makes when they first try this, so pay attention now, because I am going to save you a wasted box. A thin, barely visible dusting works. A thick pile does not. This surprises people every time. You would think more is better. It is the opposite. Pests can see a heavy pile of powder, and their instinct is to walk around it, the same way you would step around a mud puddle. A whisper-thin layer, so light you can barely see it against the floor, is invisible to them until they are already walking through it. My grandfather taught me this the same summer I turned 12, standing in the kitchen with a spice shaker in his hand, tapping out a coat of powder along the back edge of the counter so light, I asked him if he had even put any down at all. He had. That was the whole trick. Let me walk you through exactly where we use it, in the order we use it, starting inside the kitchen where the trouble usually begins. Every morning before the sun is fully up, we go along the back edges of the kitchen counters with a thin line of borax, right where the counter meets the backsplash. Roaches are nocturnal, and they travel along edges and walls, never out in the open if they can help it. And when they cross that fine dust, it clings to their legs and bodies. And when they groom themselves in the daylight hours while they rest, they take it in. For the ants, we do something different. We mix 1 part borax with 3 parts powdered sugar and sprinkle it directly across whatever trail they have marked out across the floor or the windowsill. An ant cannot tell the difference between the sugar and the borax mixed into it, so the workers carry both back to the colony to feed the queen and the young, and within about 3 days, the whole colony collapses, not just the workers you were watching march across your floor. For spiders, we mix borax into water, just enough to make a light solution, and spray it into the upper corners of every room, because spiders have their preferred real estate the same as any creature does, and once that solution dries onto the surface, it stays active for weeks, an invisible barrier that sends the spider looking for a friendlier corner somewhere else. For mice, we mix borax powder with fragments of steel wool and pack it into any gap or crack wider than a dime. A mouse cannot chew through steel wool, and if it tries, the borax irritates its skin and it's breathing enough to turn it away. 2 barriers doing the work of one, because on this farm we learned a long time ago that no single method holds up on its own the way 2 layered together will. Bedbugs get their own full treatment, because they have become so hard to beat with the sprays the stores sell now. We strip the bed down completely, dust the mattress surface generously, and work the powder into the seams and fabric with a soft brush. Leave it a full day, then vacuum it thoroughly, and we repeat that every 2 weeks for as long as an infestation is active. The powder damages the bedbug's outer coating, and it dehydrates over those days rather than dying on contact, which is exactly why patience matters more than panic with this pest especially. We do the same to the headboard, taking it down, dusting every crack and crevice, and putting it back, because the headboard sits close to where you sleep, and bedbugs know it. And if anyone in the house has traveled recently, we never bring the luggage straight into the bedroom. We dust the inside of the suitcase, zip it shut in the shed for 2 full days, then vacuum it before it ever crosses the threshold. Stopping an infestation before it starts is worth more than any treatment after the fact. For silverfish, which love a dark bookshelf more than almost anywhere else in the house, we lay thin sheets of paper dusted lightly with borax along the backs of the shelves behind the books, where they travel without ever suspecting a thing, since they have no way of smelling the borax coming. For fleas, we work borax mixed with a little table salt deep into the carpet fibers with a stiff broom, salt to draw the moisture out of the eggs and larvae, borax to handle the adults, and we leave it up to 2 days before vacuuming, because most store products only touch the adult flea and let the eggs hatch right back into the same problem a week later. Outdoors, for fleas living in the shaded parts of the yard where sunlight cannot reach and kill them naturally, we mix borax with sand and spread it across exactly those shaded strongholds, turning the flea's favorite hiding spot into the one place it cannot survive. For roaches specifically, beyond the counter dusting, we make small bait balls from borax, peanut butter, and a little sugar, about the size of a pea, and set them behind the stove, under the sink, and in the backs of the cabinets, because a roach cannot resist the fat and protein in peanut butter, and once it feeds there or simply crosses the ball, it carries traces home on its body. We also find the places where roaches actually rest during the day, the warm, dark gaps behind the refrigerator and the stove, and blow the powder into those exact gaps with an old squeeze bottle, because roaches groom while they rest, which means targeting where they sleep works better than targeting where they walk. And because roaches need water even more than they need food, we fix every drip under every sink first, then apply a thin borax paste around the pipe entry points so that a roach left thirsty by the sealed water source has nowhere left to turn but the bait we have already set out for it. Earwigs come in from the garden, so we dust a line of borax along the foundation where the soil meets the house, and reapply it after a heavy rain washes it away, since earwigs groom often enough that any powder picked up crossing that line gets ingested quickly. For early termite activity in exposed wood, we dissolve borax completely into very hot water and paint it onto the wood with an old brush, letting it soak into the grain until the wood itself becomes poison to whatever is feeding on it. For flower beetles, we empty the pantry shelves entirely, wipe them down with a borax and water solution, let them dry, and keep everything afterward in sealed glass jars, 2 layers of defense instead of 1. For drain flies breeding in the buildup inside old pipes, half a cup of borax poured down the drain, followed by boiling water, dissolves the biofilm they lay their eggs in and kills the larvae outright, something we do to every drain in this house every 2 weeks without fail. For crickets, a steady line along the baseboards in the basement and the ground floor rooms, since crickets are not drawn to it as bait the way ants are, but their bodies cannot avoid the repeated contact as they move along those same paths night after night. For a wasp nest, rather than going after the nest itself, which I would not recommend to anyone, we find the path the wasps use over and over to come and go, and dust that corridor heavily, so the insects carry the powder into the nest on their own bodies and weaken the whole colony over a week or 2, far safer than a spray can held too close to an active nest. For millipedes drawn to a damp garage, we mix borax with sand at 1 part borax to 4 parts sand, and lay it across every doorway and entry point, the grit of the sand discouraging them physically while the borax does its work chemically. Box elderbugs cluster on warm windows in the fall, so we wipe every window frame and sill with a borax solution and let it dry. And because the dried residue holds for weeks rather than evaporating the way a spray would, it does not need reapplying often. Stink bugs squeeze into cracks around the doors and windows before winter sets in, so we pack those cracks with a thick borax paste, let it dry, then seal over the top with caulk, so that any stink bug trying to dig back through touches the buried layer underneath before it ever reaches daylight. Sow bugs need humidity to survive, so we scatter borax generously in the basement, the crawl space, and around the water heater, where that humidity concentrates. And even where direct contact is not certain, the powder mildly reduces the surface moisture in those spots, making the whole area less hospitable to them. For fruit flies, we make the classic apple cider vinegar trap folks already know, but we add a small pinch of borax dissolved right into the vinegar, so the scent still does all the attracting, and the borax does the eliminating once the fly touches the liquid. For pantry moths, we cut paper to fit the shelves, coat the underside with a borax paste, let it dry, and set the paper coating side down, so any moth walking the shelf or any larvae hatching from an egg on the surface makes contact from below without the powder ever touching food directly. Carpet beetles get a floor treatment, borax mixed into warm water and mopped across every hard floor surface without rinsing, since their delicate underbodies absorb the chemical readily as they cross it, something we do every 3 months as routine, not as a reaction to a problem we already have. Out in the garden, we use borax carefully and sparingly, because it is a tool there, not a solution on its own. For aphids, a very diluted solution, about a teaspoon to a gallon of water, sprayed directly on the infested plant, since their soft bodies absorb it quickly, but too much will harm the plant's roots, so sparingly is the word to hold on to. For whiteflies, the same diluted solution, but wiped onto the underside of the leaves with a cloth rather than sprayed, giving more control over exactly how much lands where the eggs are hiding. For spider mites on houseplants, a very low concentration misted onto the leaf undersides where they colonize, followed by a plain water rinse a full day later to keep any residue from building up in the soil over repeated treatments. For thrips on the flowers, we spray early in the morning before the pollinators are active, so the solution has dried completely by the time the bees return in the afternoon, because protecting the bees matters as much to us as beating the pest does. For scorpions, where they are a concern, a heavier application along the baseboards and behind the furniture, since their segmented, slow-moving bodies mean more prolonged contact with anything on the floor they cross. For centipedes drawn to a damp bathroom, dusting along the floor perimeter behind the toilet and under the sink cabinet, since their many legs give them more surface contact than almost any other pest we deal with. For grain weevils in stored rice or oats, a small open container of borax is set inside the pantry cabinet, not touching the food itself, close enough that any weevil crossing the area picks up trace particles on its antenna and body. For a cockroach egg case, we dust it heavily right where it sits rather than disturbing it, since moving it risks scattering the eggs, and we remove the neutralized case only after 2 full days, once the borax has had time to work through the membrane. For a bedbug hiding inside a wall socket, warmth draws them there more than folks realize. So with the power off, the cover removed, and care taken to keep any powder away from the wiring itself, a small amount dusted into the cavity before the cover goes back on reaches a hiding spot most people never think to check. For ants specifically, beyond the sugar trail, we also make a liquid paste of borax, honey, and water, spread onto small pieces of cardboard along the trail, aimed at the queen rather than the workers, since it is the workers who feed her through trophallaxis, and a queen who cannot reproduce means a colony that collapses within weeks rather than one that simply loses a few soldiers. For ticks coming in off the wooded edge of a property, a 3-foot-wide treated buffer along the fence line and the border where the grass meets the woods, since ticks absorb whatever they cross through their soft body segments readily. For a yellow jacket nest in the ground, we wait until well after dark when the colony is dormant, then pour a concentrated borax and water solution directly into the entrance, always in protective clothing and never approaching an active nest in the daylight. For fleas on a family dog, a light solution dampened onto an old cloth collar and allowed it to dry completely before it ever touches the animal, used as one part of a larger flea season routine, always kept away from where the animal could chew it. For clothes moths, a thin layer inside a small cloth sachet tucked into every drawer holding wool or natural fiber, releasing slowly enough to keep the whole drawer treated for months before it needs replacing again. And once a season, we walk the entire perimeter of the house the way my grandfather walked it before me, a steady line of borax along the foundation, every corner, every place a pipe or a wire enters the house, every spot where the structure meets the ground, closing the whole property to anything that might try to come in before it ever reaches the door. Inside, we keep small permanent bait stations, little containers with tiny holes cut into the sides, filled fresh with a borax and sugar mixture once a month, and set in the attic, the basement, and all 4 exterior corners, giving any foraging pest a bait source it returns to again and again, working around the clock whether we are thinking about it or not. Now, I want to be honest with you, because I would rather lose your trust in a small way today than lose it entirely later. Borax does not kill eggs. It kills the living pest that walks through it, which means for anything that breeds fast, you need to keep the treatment down through more than 1 hatching cycle, sometimes 2 full weeks, before you see the real turn. And the single thing that ruins this for more people than anything else, wet powder does nothing at all. Rain, mopping, a damp bathroom, even ordinary humidity clumps the powder together and dulls it completely. Dry, it works for as long as it sits there. Wet, it simply goes to sleep. So outdoors, we always apply it in the morning after the dew has burned off, and never right before rain is expected, and we reapply after every storm without complaint, because that is simply the trade this powder asks of you. And here is the one safety word I promised you at the start, and I will not skip past it. Borax is not something to be eaten, by a child or by a pet, and while your own hands can go bare into a box of it without any harm, a curious toddler or a dog nosing into an open container is a different matter entirely. We keep every box closed and up high, out of reach, the same as we would with anything meant only for the pests and not for the family. Used with that respect, it is safe enough that it has sat in barns and pantries across this country for well over 100 years, and it will sit safely in yours the same way. I want to take a moment now because this is the part that matters more than any single hack I have shown you. A $4 box, sitting in the open on a grocery store shelf, handles more than 24 different pests through the very same mechanism. No resistance possible, because you cannot build resistance to a mineral scraping and drying you out the way a creature can build resistance to a chemical poison over generations. And down the road from you, a man in a white truck charges $800 a year, sometimes $1,200, to come back again and again with a canister that stops working the same way every few seasons because the pests it is meant to kill adapt to it. I am not going to tell you there is a man in a back room somewhere deciding to keep this powder quiet. I do not believe in that kind of conspiracy. It is simpler than that, and in a way it is worse. Nobody coordinated to keep this from you. They just stayed quiet, because there is no service contract in a box that sits under your sink and works for a year on $4, and a whole industry built on the monthly visit has no reason to ever mention it to you. Think about what that means beyond the money, too. Every season, an infestation is allowed to take hold. Instead of being stopped at the source, it spreads. Roaches carrying disease across your counters, ticks carrying illness in from the yard, bed bugs multiplying in a mattress seam faster than any spray can keep up with. This is not just a matter of an itchy bite or a bag of flour gone to weevils. A household that cannot get ahead of its pests is a household paying for it in more than dollars, in the health of the people sleeping in it. That is the real cost of waiting on a spray that only reaches what you can see. So here's what I want you to do this week. Find the laundry aisle at your grocery store or the pest section of your hardware store and pick up a box of borax, plain, $4 to $8. Start in the kitchen with a thin dusting along the counter edges and behind the appliances. If you have ants, mix the borax with powdered sugar and lay it right across their trail. If you have spiders, mix a light solution and treat the upper corners of every room. If mice have been getting in, pack borax and steel wool into every gap wider than a dime. Walk your foundation once this season the way my grandfather walked his, and if you keep pets or grain or a garden, use the specific treatments I showed you for each, sparingly where sparingly matters. And then, because this is the hardest part for anyone in a hurry, leave it be. Give it the days it needs to work through the colony you cannot see, not just the pest standing in front of you. Tell me in the comments below which pest has cost you the most over the years. Roaches, ants, mice, bedbugs, fleas, whatever it has been for your house. And I read every single one of these, every last comment, because the stories you all send back are the reason I keep making these. Next time, I have got another one of these old ways waiting for you, one my family has leaned on for generations, same as this one, and I think it will surprise you just as much. It is right there on your screen now, so go ahead and watch that one next. Until then, keep the box up high, keep it dry, and remember the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.